Morning. My name is Will Hennessy. I'm a product lead at Alchemy working on account abstraction. So we're building modular smart contract accounts, bundlers, paymasters, as well as embedded wallets and key management working with Turnkey. You'll meet Bryce in just a moment. At Alchemy, we're also working on rollups. And so we're running sequencers for a bunch of top popular chains, including like World Chain, and soon Degen, and a bunch of other chains as well. So I've been thinking a lot about the intersection between account abstraction and chain abstraction, and I'm really excited to get into it with some of the smartest people I know.
Awesome. And I'm Bryce. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Turnkey. Turnkey is low-level wallet infrastructure, so it can be used for everything from transaction automation and to embedded wallets. Alchemy, as Will mentioned, uses our key management infrastructure, as does OneBalance, and a lot of other folks in the AA and chain abstraction kind of space.
My name is Ethan, although I go by the alias Tabasco. I do developer relations at Particle. The kind of TLDR of what we do at Particle is that we have something called universal accounts. Universal accounts are built on existing ERC 437 infrastructure alongside kind of coordinated intents that allow you to essentially maintain a single balance across all chains, similar to what was talked about in the presentation before. So if I have some USDC on 4 or 5 different chains, I can use that collectively without the necessity to bridge, because we essentially do those bridging transactions for users. We do a lot of cross-chain AA stuff because we essentially deploy smart accounts on multiple different chains that the user is interacting with. And so I'm sure we'll get into it, but we use like a key store hub format and things like that to make those accounts consistent across chains. But the kind of TLDR is that we allow users to have a single account everywhere without needing to bridge. That's what we do.
Hi, I'm Daniel, head of product mobile at Argent. Argent is, I believe, one of the first smart account or account abstraction wallets. So we kind of did this even before 4337 was a thing. Today we are mainly focusing on Starknet, so I'm probably the oddest one in this setup here, because we are not really doing chain abstraction, but account abstraction. And you can maybe hear it already. I have a little bit of a weird voice because I'm recovering from a cold, but I will do my best on this panel today.
Hey, great to meet you. I'm Ben, as I mentioned, from Rion. Rion is what WallConnect Inc. used to be. So WallConnect is now Foundation, which is focused on the WallConnect network and the token. And at Rion, we're focused primarily on our products called AppKit and WalletKit. AppKit is for dApps, as you might guess, WalletKit for wallets. And we also have smart accounts via Magic integrated in AppKit these days. That's something that we're really focused on. So email login, social login via Magic, and expanding that offering and making it, simpler and easier for users, and also the developers integrating AppKit. So excited to talk to you all and learn more from my side.
Maybe let's just take some time to understand how you guys see what is account abstraction and how that is different to chain abstraction, and maybe what is the path from moving from account abstraction to chain abstraction? Are these things related? Maybe Will, you want to take a stab at it?
Yeah, great open-ended question. I can try to lay some groundwork and we'll pass it down the line. I think they are very much so related, initially independent. I view account abstraction first and foremost as abstracting an account on a single chain, and then chain abstraction, like Stefan talked about, is abstracting it across multiple chains. I think there are a bunch of common threads in between these things. Smart contract accounts, I think, are a big unlock for both of these. In the way that they can implement resource locks and execution across chains. But I think they're solving somewhat complementary problems. Account abstraction is designed at solving, I'd say, more account-focused problems, such as gas abstraction, and also signature abstraction, where you can implement custom signature validations. So it's about bringing the accounts on-chain, whereas EOAs today are mostly off-chain constructs, bringing them on-chain so that you're able to program different features into the account and abstract away things like gas and signatures. And then chain abstraction brings in the next layer, which is allowing you to do that off-chain or across multiple chains.
The thing I would add to that is I think account abstraction is really focused on both authentication and authorization of transactions. So this idea of how do you make sure that this person is able to take these actions, and then how do you have more flexibility with how those actions are taken? I think, as Will mentioned, then that has to be consistent across chains. So you want to have just one form of authentication that you're able to use across all these different ecosystems.
I think Will described it pretty well. The one thing I'd add is that I don't think that there's a path from account abstraction to chain abstraction. These are very distinctly different concepts, and they're generally complementary. The one thing I usually say is that you don't need, account abstraction to enable chain abstraction, but it's very commonly used to do so. We do this at Particle. We use right now ERC 437 to facilitate chain abstraction through the means of, smart accounts that we call universal accounts. And so the way that you can understand the difference between these two concepts is, as was mentioned, generally I see account abstraction as a far lower level, more specific technology that you're referring to when you talk about account abstraction. Usually you're talking about something like ERC 437 or 7702, or a technology that is specifically allowing a user to use a smart contract as a means of interacting on chain. Whereas chain abstraction is a typically more abstract concept that just generally refers to the ability to transact across multiple chains without generally needing to manually bridge or kind of manage your balances between these chains. And so the definition that we assigned to chain abstraction formally a few months ago was a user experience exempt from the manual processes required to interact with multiple chains. This includes bridging, this includes needing to think about where I hold balances on Ethereum and Optimism and Polygon or whatever. You just use applications across chains, and kind of those operations are done for you, typically with things like intents, and usually built upon fundamental things like account abstraction. But this isn't a requirement for chain abstraction, but it's complementary to it. This is how I typically see it.
I think a lot of things have been already said that make a lot of sense. I'm a product person, so I will give you that perspective. I think in crypto and Ethereum, accounts, like on default, EOA accounts, are very primitive. And I think if I want to bring it to a point, account abstraction makes the primitives of EOAs programmable, which ultimately allows us to build a UX that people are actually willing to use that are not in crypto. So it is our path to a UX that resembles what people are used to from traditional banking. And on chain abstraction, it is really basically another layer on top of that is addressing the fragmentation problem, right? So we have one problem which is on the account level that we are solving with account abstraction, making them usable. And then you have the fragmentation of the Ethereum system, which is, well, maybe you have an account abstraction wallet. People are like, cool, that has an UX. I can onboard like a normal person, right? I understand what I'm doing here. But then a friend tells me about this decentralized application that is cool and that I should use, but I just created this account, and now he tells me about optimism. What is that even, right? So chain abstraction ultimately is taking that complexity of fragmentation of the Ethereum system away and making also that basically usable for the rest of us.
Is like chain abstraction only like moving balances very smoothly across chains, or is it more than that? From a product perspective.
So, I mean, I think my personal take on chain abstraction is probably a little bit different from what most people think about it. For me, it is really it's mostly that. I think the core problem it really solves is bridging, or basically being able to use the depth that you want to use, no matter where you have your funds. But I think to the core, it is things like, if you're sending money to someone, it should be a send. It should not be a bridge and then a swap and then a send. And I think that's what chain abstraction addresses ultimately.
I mean, lots of great points already made. I'll just try and I think I kind of want to build on the previous two, where I think it's about KISS, the acronym, like keep it simple, stupid for users, in the sense of both account abstraction and chain abstraction contribute towards that, right? And now it's a question is like, okay, with account abstraction, I can onboard more easily. I don't have to necessarily deal with private keys, have that anxiety, beyond other things, opening more doors as a user to do the things I might expect I'd be able to do with an EOA, but are actually quite complex. And then with chain abstraction, you're again removing another point of anxiety of like, I want to do this thing on this other chain, but I don't know how to get there, right? That's like we all, I think almost everyone in this room is technical enough to do it, but you then take it for granted because you already know how to do it. But coming in the first time, it's like a stepping away moment, right? Like for some people, it's the private key. Private keys for some people is then the bridging, where it's, I don't want to touch this, I'm going to lose money, I'm going to step away, right? So I think for us at Rion, it's also about the goal being, how do we get to that point in the UX where it's not something you have to think about as a user anymore? Like, it's something for us as devs to think about and to solve, and not for the user. Yeah.
Maybe just to recap, like, so account abstraction is about like having verification, like on-chain verification policies, and then about having more flexible execution, like you can use paymasters, you can use like batching, and then chain abstraction is maybe about like easily moving funds without knowing that you are moving funds across different ecosystems, and maybe also syncing up those on-chain auth across chains as well. There is this like there is this on-chain auth versus off-chain auth concept that I want to get your guys' understanding on. Like, you can either code what you can do with your account on chain in the smart contract logic, or you can put some code in front of your signing mechanism to achieve the same sort of end result. Yeah, I just want to understand, like, what do you guys feel about, like, what is the trade-off space between the two? And like Bryce operates, I think, the off-chain component, and you, like, some people who are on the AA space operate more of the off-chain component. So maybe Bryce, you can start.
Yeah, so one of the core insights of Turnkey was abstracting away the private key to a series of different authentication methods. And this is all managed through TEs and kind of enclave applications. This gives a ton of advantages when we are kind of working towards this longer-term decentralized vision, because you have these consistent authentication methods that can be used across any different private keys underneath the hood. So we don't need to worry about, hey, does a certain L2 support on-chain passkeys, or can I use OAuth with Solana, or all of these different things. So I think centralized authentication right now just gives a much better user experience as we work towards that progressive decentralization of these primitives. And on top of that, it's a lot cheaper. So things like on-chain passkeys, verifying those on-chain can be more expensive. We don't really have clear ways in kind of scalable setups to do things like OAuth and email on-chain. ZK is really promising there. Longer term, there will be solutions there. I think the other piece is we have a really flexible policy engine with Turnkey, and there are a lot of things that you want to have policies on-chain for. But a lot of institutions don't want to have all of their policies out in the open. They want those to be more private. They want to use off-chain data in those policies that wouldn't be easy to bring on-chain. And so I think, again, the more centralized versions of this just give you a lot more flexibility and a lot more ownership over what you're able to do. And I think the goal is to decentralize those over time. It's much more crypto-aligned for all of that stuff to be on-chain, private, so on and so forth, but we just need to work towards that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good description. Another framework I bring to this is there's sort of a trilemma and trade-offs between like speed, cost, and self-custody. So right now we build a product called Kit that helps developers build embedded smart wallets. And they're basically all using off-chain, Turnkey specifically, key management solutions because it optimizes for simplicity and speed. And so you can create very expressive auth methods like Google login, SMS login, email login using these off-chain TEE key management systems. And right now, that's an extremely popular trade-off decision to make in the space because that's the best solution for mainstream users to onboard into a new app. Mainstream users, when you're getting started with an app, especially like something like a game, they're actually not even thinking about the self-custody axis of the trade-off space at that point in time. And so when we think about bringing the next billion users on-chain, they're very often starting with this sort of simple off-chain, less self-custodial solutions as a starting point. And then I think about it as a progressive wallet journey over time, where a lot of these new users, if they start simple and they have a really good experience, they will eventually start using more apps, building up bigger balances, learning more about Web3, and then progressively evolve to more self-custodial authentication methods. And this is where the smart account comes in as a very flexible authentication platform, where as you go through that journey, you can rotate signers on your smart account, you can add additional signers, or add additional signing rules, such as multi-signatures, or spending limits and session keys. And you can start to shift, to the degree that users want to, shift signing and authentication responsibility from off-chain to on-chain. And I think the driving force there, and I'm very curious to see over the next few years how many users actually do opt into that and choose that for themselves. The reasons to choose that would be, I think, removing points of centralization in the system. So if, for example, you onboard and build up a large sum in a DeFi application, you may one day decide, I want to remove trust assumptions on, say, the authentication system that I'm using, or ensure that I can't be censored, and implement a more censorship-resistant auth method, such as a self-custodial passkey that is validated natively on-chain in the smart account using an EIP 7212 signature validation function, for example.
I also thought like some of these are not even possible on chain. Like you cannot do Google SSO, or you cannot do like SMS verification on chain. And so it's very like, for me, looking from the outside, it was very surprising that a lot of apps are pushing back against like the decentralization narrative just because the users want Google SSO. And that was like much more surprising for me to see.
That's right. Yeah, as far as I know. Someone let me know. There's no way to do Google SSO on chain yet. I wouldn't say apps are pushing back on decentralization. I think if you ask any application developer, hey, do you want a decentralized, self-custodial, censorship-resistant system? They'll all tell you yes. But we don't have the technology to do that with Google. And in some ways, it's a little actually incompatible. If Google SSO controls your wallet, that is by definition a point of centralization.
Got it.
But I also think, sorry to finish that off though, there are always going to be trust assumptions. Passkeys have trust assumptions on Apple and Google as it is, and so having trust assumptions on Google's OAuth is not that different from using a passkey. Even using a very traditional self-custodial wallet, you have trust assumptions on Ledger or MetaMask and all of these different players. It's just we've come to kind of have that as a baseline expectation that those are trusted. So I do think it's all very much a spectrum, and decentralization is not kind of a binary thing.
Yeah, I think, I fully agree with it. It's like a spectrum. Will also made a good point. It's kind of, there's trade-offs, right? So I think ultimately it really depends what you're building and for whom. So the more funds are involved, the more you are probably building for people who live in an unstable environment. You probably want to move more things on chain. So if we are talking about someone who lives like in an unstable country where you can't rely on institutions and wants to secure a lot of funds, you probably want to have as few trust assumptions as possible. But on the other hand, I think for probably most people and most use cases around the world, you will ultimately have some level of trust assumptions that you need to live with, and you will also have some level of things off-chain if you want to provide the best experience for those people.
Okay.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
I don't want to derail your plan, Ankit, but I agree. I think Will's point was really, really good in the sense of I think we're starting at the wrong end of the spectrum with EOAs by default. It should be going in the other end, the other direction, and that you have the choice to go in that direction as fast as you feel comfortable to. You jog my memory with the on-chain passkeys, and the issue there is that the signing curve is the validation is too expensive, right? With current passkey implementation. I just want to verify because I remember something like that.
It is fairly expensive. Ledger put out a very good sort of implementation that is, I'd say, fairly affordable on layer 2s and rollups in particular.
Gotcha. Okay. Thanks.
Let's switch gears a bit. Let's talk about chain abstraction. I see the narrative picking up in the last 3 to 6 months. But is it all just crypto Twitter, or do you guys, a lot of you talk to dApps, a lot of you talk to users regularly? Is it actually something that people want, or is it just people drumming up their own thing on Twitter?
Yeah, I can start. I incessantly bull post chain abstraction on Twitter all day, so I contribute to the irrational hype a lot. But
thank you. It's important work.
But I think, what I always tell people is that chain abstraction, to be honest, right now is absolutely a hype narrative that is largely meaningless because there is no real.
Don't say that.
There's no real chain abstraction application. There's a few demos, the OneBalance demo is great. We have a demo with universal accounts that are good, but it's all tech demos and stuff like this. And so the chain abstraction as it exists today is a lot of academic, we're gonna do this thing eventually, hopefully that's gonna be pretty cool. But I think that in the long term, from what we've seen is that as a chain abstraction provider exclusively, we've spent a lot of time talking to developers and users about this concept and about kind of what we're building in this area. what we've seen, especially from developers, is a very unanimous positive reaction, because a lot of it comes from a developer perspective, it's mostly driven by incentives. And I think we talked about this during the panel at Argent's event, which is that for developers, when they're implementing chain abstraction, the incentive to do so is huge, because what they're doing is that if users can onboard into their application from anywhere without needing to bridge into the chain that application is based on, this user unlocks a few things, or sorry, this developer unlocks a few things. The first thing is that their addressable market is now the entire ecosystem that holds funds on chain. The other thing is that this developer can now deploy anywhere that they want to, unconstrained from the users that are available on that chain. So I can go and I can deploy on an app chain, or I can deploy on a chain that is best for me technologically without needing to worry about, are there enough users that are immediately available in this chain? Am I deploying on some chain that's going to handicap my growth? This is all essentially eliminated for developers, because they can deploy anywhere and address users that have funds anywhere. And so from an incentive perspective, this is a big deal, and we've seen a very positive reaction from developers in that case. From users, from the early demos that we've seen, from the tech demos, it's also a positive. It's just like the experience is drastically different than what it is currently as a standard on chain. Just that the time difference is massive, and so pretty much every user that we demoed it to, they say, okay, well, when can we actually use it? And we have to tell them soon, hopefully. But I've seen almost no negative reaction to chain abstraction across the board, except for some people that have concerns about risk management in terms of users not knowing what chains they're using and the trust assumptions and things of that nature. It's a different conversation, but I think overall it is a hype narrative, and there's no real materialization of it right now except for some half-baked infrastructure projects and demos. But I think we're moving in a direction where it will be the standard experience in 1 or 2 years.
I would say chain abstraction is mainly something that people want that use crypto currently.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, yes, there's maybe dApps and projects that are on one chain and they want to get access to users on the other chains. I would argue there's probably even some who are afraid of it, because it also means you're suddenly competing with all the copy and pasted DEXs on all the other chains. But so where I question it a little bit, whether it is really the most important things the ecosystem can focus on right now, right? So I personally would love to have fully chain abstracted wallet, right? I'm using multiple chains. It's very annoying to bridge from A to B. But if we are looking at kind of the bigger problem of the ecosystem, which is, well, we have these people who are in crypto for a long time, and we have more of a trouble actually getting new people in, maybe not only in crypto, but especially on the self-custodial part of crypto. And if I look at the big problems that generally people have around the world where crypto is a solution to, for example, the classic emerging markets, Latin America, you have high inflation. Stablecoins solve a really big problem for these people, and all the solutions they have are hard to use, right? For the problems that these people have, they don't need multiple chains. They need one wallet that they can easily use, that's self-custodial, easy to onboard, easy to on-ramp, easy to buy stablecoins, maybe easy to get some APY on it. But I doubt that it matters for these people whether that happens on Optimism, whether that happens on Arbitrum or on Starknet. And they probably are not interested in the technicalities of this. So that is my main point. Is the ecosystem focusing on the right thing with this hype? I don't know. Is it generally a good thing? Yes, because the fragmentation is a big problem, and it makes everyone's life harder.
Yeah, the thing I would add to that is I think we haven't figured out what the killer crypto applications are across the board that are going to onboard hundreds of millions of users. And people can experiment on one ecosystem to figure that out. So a lot of the big applications over the last year have just been focused on one ecosystem. And chain abstraction ultimately then is an optimization. So it's expanding that TAM. It's going to other places where there are good incentives. It's an important one. And I think the kind of broader market setup of crypto is you have a lot of ecosystems with massive treasuries, and we have a lot more ecos that are going to be launching in the next couple of years. And so it's going to be important to tap into those to have the kind of strong, scalable product long term. But I generally agree with what's been said. It's more on the kind of 2+ year time horizon for me.
Yeah, maybe to summarize, and I know we need to wrap, is chain abstraction, I think, is an advanced problem. And I think any sufficiently sophisticated ecosystem or user will run into it over time. I think they're starting today with the simpler step one, right? Which is, hey, let's actually build a single chain application extremely well. And let's hit that out of the ballpark. And then we can scale to more chains. And so the current meta for most new application developers, and we're going to see a lot of this in 2025, you guys, is I'm building a new app. I'm going to build my own rollup with ultra low gas costs. I'm going to build embedded wallets that onboard users directly to my app, my chain, and it's going to be laser fast, incredibly cheap, and amazing user experience, but it's going to be fragmented. It's going to be your own wallet, your own chain that doesn't talk very well with other chains and other wallets. And those, I think, are the most important problems that we'll be thinking about, and this group will be thinking about in 2025, because as those apps grow and these users start doing more things, they're really going to want to tap into liquidity, context, data, credentials on other chains and in other applications, because Web3 is not about silos. Web3 is fundamentally about interoperability. And so account abstraction and chain abstraction are, in my opinion, the two most important problems to build and bring the vision of interoperability to the whole space in a way that is very low cost and very easy to use.
Maybe one last thing that I would like to add is, I think what we are seeing with this whole narrative is, I mean, technically that is how innovation works, right? So we had a problem scaling Ethereum. The solution was L2s. Now, we branched out. A lot of teams had different ideas how an L2 should look like, right? What are the parameters? Should it be EVM compatible? Should it not be EVM compatible? So we are experimenting, right? So there's a lot of different solutions to the same problem. And then at some point, that is how it works. You have different options of solutions, and now you need to converge, right? So maybe the solution is chain abstraction. Maybe the solution is also that one L2 wins. Maybe there's even more, and we find, I think the important thing is the discussion is the right one. We identified the problem, that is fragmentation, and we are addressing it. And I think that is ultimately the important part. Because, I mean, by now it's almost a meme of people starting L2s. Probably someone will leave this room today and start an L2. So, or an L3. Maybe an L5, I don't know. So,
yeah, what did Stefan say? Millions of rollups? It's happening.
It's like I can deploy a new rollup in 2 minutes today. It's as easy as that. I know we are running out of time. Do we have space for a couple of questions? Are there any questions in the audience? There's one question over there, man in the white.
Do you think that intents and chain abstraction is the right language, or are there alternatives that make it easier for normal people to understand, heterogeneous compute? I see all of these chains as just compute providers with different costs, and it's portability between them which is difficult.
I don't think normal users have to engage with the concept of chain abstraction. It's like asking a normal internet user to understand what their cloud provider is underneath the hood. And so I think this is just something for developers, and if developers are understanding the language, we don't need to really overcomplicate it. There probably is some optimization of that term, but I think it's kind of working good enough.
Yeah, I agree. I think Derek from ZeroDev did this. He did this tweet where he said, we should change chain abstraction to asset-centric transactions. And I told him, and I was like, that I understand, but users and anybody that's not developer doesn't need to know what chain abstraction is. Chain abstraction is a term that is designed for infrastructure providers and for developers to communicate this design pattern that we're creating in the ecosystem. If chain abstraction is successful and actually does what we're hoping it will do, I don't think that there's going to be a time in which it's even known, or it's a talked about thing. It's going to be the same way cloud providers. Whenever I open Twitter or YouTube, I don't think about this is built on AWS or GCP, and that's pretty cool. That's not a thought that I have, and so I think that's probably how chain abstraction is going to evolve.
Any other questions?
Do you see chain abstraction as something that'll converge from the perspective of design towards some sort of canonical spec that everybody will agree on in 10 years? Or is it the kind of thing that has inherent trade-offs where it'll stay itself somewhat fragmented?
This is a really good question. I think that in my opinion, people generally have different thoughts on this. I don't think chain abstraction itself is something that can be standardized or be assigned to a spec or anything like that. I think chain abstraction is a pretty loose set of different problems that are being solved that collectively enable the chain abstracted experience. I don't really think that even today with the different chain abstracted solutions, fragmentation is that big of an issue. The only source of fragmentation that you might see in the chain abstraction stack is going to be like between different smart account implementations, and that's being addressed and solved in the ecosystem right now. And so I think that this isn't going to be a problem long term, and I'm perfectly fine with us continuing down the path of just having kind of disparate technologies that are solving different problems that contribute to kind of a larger idea of what chain abstraction will enable, rather than trying to define it and confine it rather to some specific standard or spec.
That's a good way to describe it. It is a very broad category of problem. For example, we've talked a lot about maybe the simplest version, which is one-to-one asset transactions across chains, but there are many more versions of this, like end-to-one transactions. There's also just non-asset based like state transactions. There are things like proving things across chain that doesn't actually move assets, but is proving some data or credential. And I think we're going to see many different types of cross-chain execution. And I think to the gentleman's question in the back, it's a good question. I think there are probably terms that will develop, hopefully over the next year, that specify more specific solutions within the chain abstraction space. Because, yeah, there will be multiple different solutions that emerge, solving each of these different problems, because they optimize for different trade-offs, right? Depending if you're building payments or credential proving or whatever, and those services will be better suited to execute those specific type of cross-chain intents.
Cool. I think there's one more question, and then no, okay, it's done. I am getting pushback from a priori now, so I have to cut it off. I think let's give a round of applause to everyone on the panel. Thanks a lot for coming here. Thanks a lot for giving us your precious time.